Snow had been falling since noon, and Connor Reilly was already late for the most pointless evening of his life. He had no idea that the woman he was about to pull from a snowbank on the Queensway was the exact person his brother had spent 3 weeks trying to convince him to meet. The same woman Connor had decided, sight unseen, he wanted absolutely nothing to do with. Connor gripped the steering wheel of his 2009 Dodge Ram, the heater rattling at full blast and losing badly against the January cold bleeding through the cracked window seal. At 38, he was a licensed electrician running a one-man operation out of a rented unit in Kanata. Reilly Electrical, painted in fading blue lettering on the side of the truck, and a single father to 6-year-old Maeve, who was currently at his mother's house in Barhaven, probably conning her grandmother out of a third bedtime cookie. He had traded his work boots for a pair of dress shoes he'd found at the back of the closet, stiff and slightly too tight, and pulled on the charcoal blazer he'd worn exactly twice since his ex-wife, Pauline, had left 2 years ago with most of their savings and all of her reasons. He had kept Maeve. He had kept the truck. He had kept the debt. His brother Patrick had done this. 3 weeks of pressure, of texts sent at 7 a.m., of phone calls that always started with just hear me out and ended with Connor sighing at the ceiling. Her name is Harriet, Patrick had said. She works in finance. Big firm downtown. She's sharp as hell and she's tired of guys who just want to impress her. You're the least impressive guy I know, Connor, and I mean that in the best way. Connor had laughed despite himself. Patrick had booked a table at Fair, a restaurant on Elgin Street so aggressively upscale it didn't list prices on the website, which Connor had checked twice, increasingly alarmed. He had $43 in his wallet and a debit card he was trying not to think about. He didn't want to go. He wanted to go home, reheat the lentil soup he'd made on Sunday, and watch something forgettable on television until he fell asleep on the couch. He wanted to not sit across from a woman who worked in finance, which meant, in his experience, a woman who would ask what he did, hear electrician, and spend the rest of dinner constructing a polite exit. He was bracing for 2 hours of being found wanting. 10 kilometers away, on the westbound Queensway just past the Moody Drive exit, Harriet Okafor was experiencing something she had not experienced in 11 years of driving. Her car was stuck. At 41, Harriet was the chief financial officer of Alderton Capital, a private equity firm managing nearly $4 billion in assets out of a glass tower on Albert Street. She had spent her afternoon unwinding a fractured limited partnership structure that had taken 3 of her analysts 2 weeks to build incorrectly. And she had done it in 90 minutes with a whiteboard and a red marker. She was precise, relentless, and universally respected, which was a word she knew that people used when they meant feared. Her closest friend and head of communications at the firm, a woman named Blythe, had spent the better part of December engineering this evening. "You need to talk to someone who doesn't want anything from you, Harriet," Blythe had said, sliding a card across the desk with the restaurant name on it. "He's a single dad. He does electrical work. He has no idea who you are, and he would have absolutely no reason to pretend to like you." Harriet had looked at the card for a long time. "That is either the most insulting thing you've ever said to me," she'd finally replied, "or the most honest." "I know," Blythe had said, already walking out. Harriet had dismissed her driver for the evening, an act of minor rebellion she occasionally permitted herself. She was driving her own car, a gunmetal gray 2021 Volvo S90, which was now wedged at an angle in a shallow snowbank on the shoulder of the highway, the passenger side front wheel spinning uselessly against packed ice. The highway had been fine, and then the highway had not been fine, and a momentary patch of black ice had done in 30 seconds what no boardroom rival had managed in a decade. She was sitting with the hazard lights blinking, her phone showing 1 bar of signal that kept dropping to nothing. The tow company's recorded message had put her on hold 11 minutes or so and then disconnected. The wind was throwing snow sideways across the glass. She was wearing a charcoal wool coat over a deep burgundy dress, and the car's heating system, while perfectly functional, had started to feel less like warmth and more like a sealed container. Connor almost didn't stop. He was already 20 minutes behind, the highway was moving badly, and he genuinely did not want to add anything else to the evening. But his headlights caught the hazards first. That specific rhythm, panicked and patient at once, and then he saw the Volvo's angle, nose toward the ditch, and his brain did what it always did. Assessed, calculated, decided. He pulled onto the shoulder without consciously choosing to. He climbed out into the cold, shoulders hunched against the wind, and walked up to the driver's window. He knocked twice. The window came down 3 inches. You okay? He said, raising his voice over the highway noise. I'm fine. The voice was controlled, firm, and coming from a woman who was clearly not fine. I have a tow truck coming. Connor looked at the wheel, the angle of the car, the hard-packed ice beneath the tire. When'd you call? A pause. 40 minutes ago. He nodded slowly. On a Tuesday night in January, after the first real snowfall, you're probably looking at 2 more hours. He crouched down to look at the wheel placement. You're not badly stuck. Front passenger wheels caught on the curb edge under the snow. If you've got a piece of cardboard in the boot, or even a floor mat, I can get you out in 10 minutes. The window came down another inch. You're a tow truck driver? Electrician. He straightened up. But I've pulled my own truck out of worse than this about 40 times. It's your call. There was a silence. Connor waited. He wasn't pushy about it. There's a tote bag in the boot, she said. You can use the bag itself. It's canvas. He went to the back of the car and she released the trunk remotely. He found the bag, emptied its contents carefully onto the floor of the trunk, a laptop sleeve, a water bottle, a folded umbrella, and brought the canvas around to the stuck wheel. He worked efficiently, packing the material under the tire, checking the angle, knocking on her window again. When I wave, ease forward. Don't accelerate hard, just gentle pressure. She did exactly what he said. The first try didn't work. The second try, with him pushing at the rear quarter panel, broke the wheel free with a muffled crunch and the Volvo rolled smoothly back onto the shoulder. Connor straightened up, breathing hard in the cold air. She stepped out of the car. He hadn't expected her to. Most people wound the window down, said thank you, and drove away. She came around the front of the car in leather boots that had no business being near a snowbank and stood in the glow of her own headlights, looking at him directly. She was tall, composed in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, and she was looking at him the way she probably looked at balance sheets. Like she was taking in information and filing it away before rendering any visible reaction. Thank you, she said. It was simple and it was real, which he hadn't expected either. No problem. He handed her the canvas bag, now damp and slightly misshapen. Drive slow until you're back on the main road. The ramp's icy. You're headed into the city? She asked. Elgin Street. I'm already late. Something flickered across her face. I'm going to Elgin Street. He looked at her. The hazards were still going, clicking in the dark. Small city, he said. She almost smiled. It didn't quite arrive, but it was close. I'm Harriet. Connor. He pulled his collar up against the wind. Drive safe, Harriet. Take the ramp slow. Good luck with wherever you're going. Cheers, he said, and walked back to the truck. They pulled away in opposite directions. Her Volvo south along the ramp, his Ram back into the westbound lane to cut through the surface roads, and neither of them knew. Neither of them had any reason to know. The woman with the snowbank and the man with the canvas bag were driving separately through the January dark toward the same table at fare, and toward each other, and toward something neither of them had been looking for, and both of them needed badly. The restaurant hit Connor the moment he pushed through the door, warm, amber-lit, the sound of conversation pressed down to a tasteful murmur, the smell of something complicated involving truffle and wine reduction. He was underdressed, and he knew it immediately. The man at the host stand had the particular expression of someone trained not to let his face say anything while his face said everything. Reservation under Okafor, Connor said, because Patrick had told him the reservation was in her name, a detail he'd noted at the time and was now understanding more fully. The host checked his screen. Of course. This way, please. Connor followed him through the room, aware of his dress shoes on the hardwood floor and the fact that his blazer had a small paint mark on the left cuff he had not noticed under his bathroom light. He was shown to a table near the window, white linen, 2 candles, a wine list lying in wait like a threat, and he sat down and looked at the menu. The entree started at $62. He turned the page. They continued from there. He ordered water. He looked at his phone. 8:14. He thought about Maeve, who would be asleep by now, hopefully, her grandmother's voice low in the dark. He thought about the lentil soup. He thought about how long was polite to wait before he could reasonably leave. And then the room shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the particular quality of attention that moves through a space when someone enters who belongs in it completely, and it moved through fare like a current. Connor looked up from his water glass. Harriet Okafor walked through the restaurant with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once wondered whether she was in the right place. Her coat was gone. The burgundy dress was striking under the warm light. Her hair was pulled back cleanly, and there was a small diamond at each ear. She was speaking briefly to the host, nodding once, and then her eyes swept the room with the same look she'd given him on the highway shoulder. Systematic, composed, landing. She stopped. Connor's water glass hovered an inch above the table where he'd half placed it and forgotten to let go. She crossed the room toward him. He stood up, because some part of his brain was still operational. She reached the table and they looked at each other in the candlelight, and the mutual recognition was so complete and so absurd that for a moment neither of them said anything. "The electrician," Harriet said. "The Volvo," said Connor. And then he laughed, a real one, unexpected, coming from somewhere below the tension in his chest. And after a half second, Harriet laughed too. Not the polished social laugh she deployed at client dinners. Something shorter and more genuine, caught off guard. She sat down across from him. The host materialized, flustered that introductions had apparently already occurred, and retreated. The server arrived. Harriet glanced at the menu without opening it and ordered a glass of burgundy. Connor ordered another water and did not open the menu either. "So," Harriet said, "Patrick's brother." "Blythe's project," said Connor. She tilted her head, something shifting in her expression. "Did you know it was going to be like this? The table, I looked up the menu online," he admitted, 3 times. She looked at him steadily. And I thought, I'll have the soup and I'll be polite and I'll go home." He held her gaze because he'd decided on the highway that there was no version of this evening he was going to get through by being careful. "What about you?" "1 drink," she said. "Blame an early morning. Leave." She paused. That was the plan. The server came back. Harriet ordered for them both, something off the menu he hadn't reached, and when the server left, she said, without preamble, "I pushed your tire out of a snowbank 3 winters ago. Different car. Highway 417, same exit, same curve. I used a hockey bag." She said it the way she'd said everything else, directly, without softening it into a story. "So we're even." Connor looked at her. "You're serious?" "I keep a small folding shovel in every vehicle I own now," she said. "I learned it from my grandfather. He drove a Buick in Winnipeg for 40 years, and he said the highway doesn't care what you drive, it only cares whether you're prepared." "My grandfather said almost the same thing," Connor said, "except about electrical panels. He said the panel doesn't care how good the architect's drawings are, it only cares what's actually wired." Were they both right? Every single time. She wrapped her hand around the stem of her wineglass without lifting it, looking at him with an expression that had changed from the one she'd brought into the restaurant. The professional surface was still there. He could see it, the habit of it, the armor she'd worn so long it fit like skin. But something underneath it had shifted slightly, like a panel door that's been pushed and hasn't swung open yet but is no longer entirely latched. "Your brother said you're raising your daughter alone," she said. "Her name's Maeve. She's 6. He said it the way he always said it, factual, not performing anything. She's obsessed with circuits right now. Last week she tried to wire a lamp from a kit she found at the library sale, and she nearly got it right." "Nearly?" "She had the polarity backwards. I let her figure it out herself. Took her about 20 minutes. She hasn't forgotten since." Harriet was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been doing it alone?" 2 years. He didn't elaborate. She didn't push. 5, she said. He looked at her. "Not a daughter. My firm. Building it the way I wanted to build it. Alone." She picked up her wine glass. "It's not the same thing." "No," he said honestly, "but it's not nothing either." She looked at him for a moment as though recalibrating something. "Most people say it must be so rewarding." "Most people say that about raising kids alone too," he said. "It's like they want to hand you something that makes it easier to hold." "Yes," she said quietly, "exactly that." The food arrived. Connor ate without checking the price again. They talked about Kanata and the specific texture of growing up in a city that was always calling itself almost something, about Maeve's school and the teacher who had recently told Connor, with evident surprise, that Maeve was unusually good with logical systems, about the Alderton Capitol floor at 6 a.m., when the cleaning crew had just finished and it was still quiet, and Harriet sometimes stood at the window and looked at the Rideau Canal and felt, briefly, that the city belonged to her in the way that only solitude could give you. He told her about a house in Hintonburg he'd rewired last summer, a century-old Victorian whose previous owner had done half the work himself in the 1980s with wiring that had apparently never met code, and how Connor had spent 3 days pulling knob and tube out of walls and found, in a sealed cavity behind the kitchen, a coffee tin containing 43 handwritten letters from 1943, all addressed to the same woman, all signed only with the initial R. I left them with the homeowner, he said, but I kept thinking about them for weeks. What did you think about them? That somebody took the time. That it mattered enough to write it down. Harriet set her fork down, not because she'd finished, but because she was looking at him and didn't want to look at anything else. That is not what I expected you to say. What did you expect? She considered this honestly. Something practical. It is practical, he said. Taking the time is the practical decision. Everything that doesn't take the time eventually fails. A shadow fell across the table. Connor registered it a half-second before Harriet's expression changed. He saw it happen, saw the warmth close like a window sash dropping, and turned to find a man standing at the edge of their table. 60s, good suit, silver hair swept back with the confidence of someone who had stopped being told no a very long time ago. He was looking at Harriet with the particular smile of a man who thinks he's arrived to collect something. Harriet, the man's voice was smooth and proprietary. I didn't realize you were dining tonight. Alderton table, I assume? No table, Harriet said. Her voice had dropped to a temperature Connor hadn't heard from her before. Personal evening, Graham. Graham Alderton, founder, majority shareholder, the name on the building, looked at Connor with the practiced assessment of a man who priced everything on sight. I didn't know you were seeing someone. He said it in a tone that was less curiosity and more notification, as if the fact of her private life was something he had a stake in. I'm not sure that's information you'd need, Harriet said. Graham laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. He turned back to Connor with the manner of a man extending a courtesy. She's extraordinary, you know. Built half our current portfolio from scratch. I sometimes tell people she's the best investment I ever made. The emphasis on investment was so slight that most people would have missed it. Connor didn't miss it. Sounds like she built it, Connor said pleasantly. Not sure that's the same thing as being one. Graham's smile held but didn't reach his eyes anymore. He looked back at Harriet. We should connect tomorrow. The Pemberton structure is going to need another look. Book it with my assistant, Harriet said. Good night, Graham. Graham studied Connor for another moment, the way a man studies something he doesn't have a category for, and then he nodded once and moved away through the restaurant. Connor turned back to his plate. He picked up his fork. You didn't have to do that, Harriet said. I didn't do anything. He ate a bite of the lamb. He said you built the portfolio. I agreed with him. That's all. She stared at him for a long moment. In 11 years, no one had ever walked into the corner of a room Graham Alderton was occupying and simply redirected the current without making anything of it. Without theater, without scorekeeping, without looking to her afterward to confirm that he'd done something impressive. Connor was already looking at his dinner. The lamb is good, he offered. She picked up her fork. Yes, she said, it is. They stayed until the restaurant began its subtle theater of closing. The tables around them clearing, the lighting softening another degree, the music lowering. When they finally walked out into the January night, the snow had stopped, and the street held that specific Ottawa quiet of a cold evening after weather, the city muffled and clean. They stood on the sidewalk. Their cars were in different directions. I don't usually do this, Harriet said. She didn't specify what this was. She didn't need to. I had soup planned, Connor said, at home. Was it good soup? It's always good soup. He turned up his collar against the cold. Maeve likes it. She calls it orange soup, even though it's technically lentil red. I've stopped correcting her. Harriet looked at him with something in her face that had not been there at the beginning of the evening. I'd like to do this again, she said. Straight, the way she said everything. Not here. Somewhere that doesn't require a week's notice. I know a place on Richmond Road that does breakfast all day and has good coffee and absolutely no ambience. That sounds correct, she said. She held out her hand. He shook it, and they both recognized the slight absurdity of handshaking after the evening they'd had, and he didn't let go of it right away, and she didn't pull it back right away, and the cold air sat around them without making demands. 4 days later, the world came back. Connor was in the Reilly electrical unit at 7 a.m., going through the invoicing he'd been avoiding, when the number from Alderton Capital showed up on his phone. He almost didn't answer it. It was a number he didn't recognize, and the exchange was downtown. It was Harriet. "I need to tell you something before you hear it elsewhere," she said. No preamble. "Graham Alderton has been telling people, and by people I mean 2 board members and a journalist he's friendly with, that I'm distracted, that my personal judgment has become erratic. The implication is that whatever is happening in my private life is affecting my professional reliability." A pause. He's been building this argument for 6 months. Last Tuesday gave him an audience and an anecdote. Connor sat down on the edge of his workbench. "I'm sorry, that's because of me." "It's not because of you," she said, with the precision of someone who has thought this through completely. "It's because I am 11 months away from being eligible to trigger a buyout clause that would give me controlling interest in Alderton Capital, and Graham has known this for 2 years. He's been looking for any justification to push me out or diminish my standing before that window opens." Another pause. "I am telling you this because you should know the context, and because I don't want you to hear a version of it that makes you feel like a variable in someone else's equation." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" She seemed surprised by the question, not offended, surprised. "I'm handling it." "That's not what I asked." A longer pause this time. "No," she said, "not particularly." "Okay," he said. "Then do you want to get the terrible coffee now or later?" She was quiet for another moment. "Connor." "Yeah. I'm going to be in a very significant legal and corporate fight for the next several months," she said. "It's going to be consuming, it's going to be visible, and I have to win it." "I know," he said. "I'm not sure what I'm offering you here." "I'm not sure you're offering me anything," he said. "I'm not sure that's the part that matters right now." He heard her exhale slowly on the other end of the line. Outside the unit's small window, a yellow salt truck moved past on the snow-covered road. Somewhere in the back of his mind he was aware of the invoice on his screen, of the truck needing its rear wiper replaced, of Maeve's school pickup at 3:15. His life was made of these things. Specific, small, continuous things. He had built a living out of learning to hold them carefully. "Later," Harriet said. "The coffee. Can we say Saturday?" "Saturday works," he said. "I'll bring Maeve, if that's all right. My mother has a thing." Another pause. He braced for the shift, the gentle recalculation, the polite way people sometimes had of suggesting that a 6-year-old complicated a plan. "Does she take her coffee black?" Harriet asked. "She takes hot chocolate," he said. "Precisely 2 marshmallows. She's very firm about it." "Saturday," Harriet said. 10 o'clock. He put his phone face down on the workbench and sat there for a moment in the cold of the unit, the fluorescent light flickering faintly overhead the way it always did until it warmed up. He thought about the letters in the coffee tin, sealed inside the kitchen wall for 60 years. About the lamp circuit, polarity reversed, Maeve working through it on her own for 20 minutes until the logic clicked. Some things, he thought, took time. Some things needed to be handled carefully, patiently, with the right tools. Some things looked, from the outside, like they were simply broken, and some things were only waiting for someone who knew the difference. There's a moment in this story that I keep coming back to. Connor is standing on the shoulder of the Queensway in January, in dress shoes, in the dark, pushing a stranger's car out of a snowbank. He doesn't know who she is. He doesn't ask. He just looks at the problem, figures out what it needs, and does the work. That detail says everything to me about the kind of person he is, and I think it explains, more than anything else, why the rest of the story goes the way it does. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in a mystical way, not fate or signs or the universe arranging things, just the plain mechanics of it. Connor stops because he was raised to stop. He was taught by a grandfather who believed the highway doesn't care what you drive, only whether you're prepared. That teaching became a habit, and that habit became character, and character is what you do when nobody's watching and you're already late and it's cold and you really don't want to. He stopped anyway. And everything that followed came from that. Harriet is a different kind of story, but the same principle underneath. She built something significant, not because she was given it, but because she understood things deeply and refused to cut corners, even when cutting corners would have been easier and nobody would have noticed. That kind of intelligence isn't just being clever, it's being honest about what you see. It's looking at a fractured structure and saying this is wrong instead of this will probably hold. She did that with balance sheets. She eventually did it with herself too, sitting across from a man she'd expected to dismiss and finding instead someone worth listening to. What I find genuinely moving about both of them is that neither of them is performing anything. Connor isn't trying to seem humble. Harriet isn't trying to seem human. They're just tired and real, and they've each been carrying something heavy for long enough that they've stopped expecting anyone to notice. There's a kind of steadiness in people who've done hard things for a long time without applause. You can feel it. Harriet felt it in him that night. I felt it too, reading it. And Maeve, 6 years old, polarity reversed on a lamp circuit, working through it herself for 20 minutes until it clicked. Connor let her do that. He didn't fix it for her. He understood that the lesson was in the struggle, not in the solution, and he had the patience and the love to stand back and let her earn it. That's not a small thing. That is, in my experience, one of the hardest things a parent can do. It takes a particular kind of wisdom to know when helping is actually taking something away. I think what this story is really about is what happens when people with genuine integrity finally find each other. Not drama, not rescue, just recognition. Two people who've each been doing the right thing in their own corner of the world, quietly without much reward. And then, by accident, on a January night on the Queensway, in the middle of a snowstorm, they see it in each other. That's not luck. That's what integrity looks like when it finally gets its return.